Joyce Rachel Dorman Cunningham.
And what is your date of birth?
November 28, 1925. I was born in the home out on Little Elm Road.
And
In the living room.
Is that where you live now?
That is where I live now.
And I just want to remind, my name is Scott Davis, and I'm doing this interview for the Prairie Grove Oral History Project. And we want to be sure that we have your permission to reuse this interview as part of this project.
Scott, you have my permission to reuse it.
Thank you so much. Who were your parents?
My father was Maynard Anthony Dorman. My mother was Rosalie Eugene Dorman.
And tell me about your family.
My immediate family, my husband you're speaking of?
No, your family at home. Did you have any siblings?
I had an older sister, Eugenia. She was 13 when I was born, and Myrtilla was 10 when I was born.
Okay, now tell me about your family, your parents at home. What did y'all do when you were a young child around the home?
Well, we lived on a farm. We had 80 acres out there. My father purchased 80 acres, and it was a fruit farm. We had apples, grapes, strawberries, plums, cherries, you name it. We had all of it, and that was the main thing that we did. Then he later worked for an insurance company. We did both things.
Okay, what was your job at the house? How would you help out on the family farm?
I'm sure that when I was born, they were hoping for a boy to help father with the farming. I turned out to be his boy. I worked in the fields, in the strawberries. I put the crates together. I put the handles in the grape baskets. I drove the team of mules. I did it all as a boy would do and loved every minute of it.
Tell me what it was like to drive a team of mules.
Well, I was about 8, I think, when I first started doing that. And I did that when Dad would be cultivating row crops so that I could keep the mules off of the crops and he wouldn't have to worry about that. And I loved it. I loved it. I enjoyed it. The mules' names were Jude and Beck. And then later in the grape vineyard, I was in charge of the wagon and the mules. And I picked up the grapes and tallied them and would go from row to row with the team of mules, back them up, go forward, whatever I had to do. But they obeyed me, and I loved every minute of it.
Tell me, was that hard work?
Well, you got tired, but I didn't think of it as hard work. It was just something we were going to do. You had to do to survive. That was how you made your living.
Tell me more about your family business.
Well, then we came to Prairie Grove to school. This was before consolidation. In Eugenia and Myrtilla, Dad had an old touring car, and there were several students from the neighborhood that rode. That was the school bus from our area. So I was able to come to Prairie Grove for the first 2 years. Then the old car died, and Father did not have the money to repair it. And it so happens that one of the students riding with us was driving it, and I always blamed my older sister for letting him drive it. I said, he killed our car. He killed it. When it rained a lot, the road got very, very muddy, and the car couldn't drive through, and Dad would have to bring the team of mules to pull us through areas on that Little Elm Road. The car just couldn't make it be so muddy. So the team of mules came in very handy many, many times that way. And when they would get out of the pasture, it happened to be on Sunday morning. And someone would call Dad to tell him that our mules were at their place. And he said, well, can you fence them in? Because most certainly we were ready to come into Sunday school. And sometimes they could, and sometimes they couldn't. They were just out on the road. So if they couldn't fence them to keep them till after church, Dad and I went after the mules. We'd bring them home. Then we would come on in for Sunday school and church. But that was the day of the week they got out, was on Sunday.
What about other chores you would do around the house, you and your sisters? What all would you have to do when you were a kid?
Well, at a very young age, they didn't have me doing much of anything because of Eugenia and Martella being the older ones. But I always had to learn how to wash dishes and dry them. But I really wasn't much of a cook. I didn't learn to cook at a young age. Had to keep my bed made and my clothes picked up. But I guess I probably did some dusting sometimes.
What about electricity? When did y'all get electricity in your house?
1939, Ozark Electric came through.
So what was it like before electricity?
Coal oil lamps, and then when they came along with the Aladdin lamp, and then what was that other? There was a coal one lamp, and those were better lights. Dad fixed up with a battery and could have one bulb with that battery and could have that light, and he could read and study by that at night. Back in that day also, many people got together and we had prayer meetings in the homes and Bible study. And there was a lot of that went on. I learned to get down on my knees and pray as a child, because that was a big thing in the community with many friends.
Now, where all did you go to church? I know you went to a couple different places.
Prairie Grove Methodist was the main church because Mother and Father lived in Prairie Grove first before they bought the farm and moved out there. So they always continued to come back because Dad was superintendent. He got there early and made the fires. He sang in the choir, and he was very, very active and all about the church. But we didn't have the money to come back into Prairie Grove at night. And the Little Elm Baptist Church was on the corner of the farm, and that's where we went at night. And we sang in the choir. I played the piano. My mother sang solos there. So we were very active on Sunday evenings with that church.
Tell me about your involvement in the Prairie Grove Methodist Church. I know you've been involved with as organist and piano player for many years.
Well, of course, came here from when I was born. And it was Easter Sunday when I was 12 that I think there were 4 or 5 girls that we joined the church that Easter Sunday. And from then on, I was involved in the choir, sang in the choir, then I played the piano, learned to play the organ. But the minister's wife, the minister that married Robert Earl and I, his wife was quite an organist, and she taught us organ. And I also studied organ under Ms. Solomon in Fayetteville. And so I've been very involved. And then I was leader of the choir, was director of the choir. So I've been involved with the choir.
How long have you played organ for the... What year did you start? Because you're still playing now, right?
Yes, I probably was 18 or 19 when I was first learning to play. And I'm 91. So how many years is that?
What are your earliest memories coming to, besides church, coming to downtown Prairie Grove and interacting with the businesses and the community there? What all do you remember about that?
Well, there were 2 drugstores, the Sterling and Carmen's, and if you were going to go to the movie, you could go for 10 cents to the movie. And there was the mock clinic, which was really a hospital, and that building is still there. And flower shops, the Crescent, the Southern Mercantile had a grocery store, a hardware store, and a dry goods. They had 3 sections. And I even worked at the Southern Mercantile for a while. They closed the hardware, they closed the dry goods part because there wasn't much business for that with the Crescent, and people could get into town to Fayetteville and places. Then every Friday in the grocery store, they made chili. So what we would do, we would get a loaf of bread. That's what we ate with the chili, was a loaf of bread. And we would go in and have our chili. And oh, it was so good. It was so good.
Tell me about working at the Mercantile. What years would you have worked there? Approximately.
Well, I worked through inventory one year, and of course you had to count nails and all. And the fellows that worked there, to be busy, I didn't like to stand around and sit around. I would clean out under the counters and all, and the fellows said, "You're making us look bad, don't do all of that." I said, "Well, I've got to keep busy." And I had worked in the office for Miss Hill first, and then, but it was interesting to see the people and meet the people as the customers as they came in.
How old were you when you worked at the Mercantile?
Well, I was married then, so I was about 21, I think.
Okay. Tell me, did you go to school in Prairie Grove and to high school?
The 1st and 2nd grade, and that's when the car died. Then I went to Bethel Grove through the 8th. Then there was didn't have buses, and this was before consolidation. So the first year, I drove the pickup back into Prairie Grove. I was 14. And then the next year they had a bus system. In the 10th grade, I rode the bus.
So what was the school building like when you went to Prairie Grove? Can you describe it?
Well, the pictures that we looked at, that was the building that I was in high school. The big, the library was in the bottom, and that was study hall. And the 3-story. And the grade school I went to had been built across the street. That brick building that was over there that has since been removed.
What was the condition of the school building that you remember?
You know, I wasn't aware of it
Really?
being in such terrible shape. I went up and down the stairs without any fear, so.
Tell me about some of your friends and classmates that you knew during school.
A.D. Glidewell was one. We had 2 sets of twins in our class, the Morrison twins, and they were identical girls. They're both deceased. There was another set, a sister and a brother. Trying to think recall their name. Maxine Rickard was one of the classmates. Right now, I'm a blank. I didn't.
Do you remember any of the teachers?
I had Martha Weaver for my math teacher, algebra and geometry. And I was so proud of my grade because Martha, I mean, you had to know your math to get your grade, and I made A's and B's under her. I felt so proud about that. And my family, dad's sisters and all, are so good in math, so good. So I was very pleased.
Well, let's talk about whenever you got married and began to raise your family. About what year was that in?
Robert Earl and I were married July 25th, 1942. And I lacked 1 year of school. I only lacked one semester. So I didn't go the first semester because you did all the fun things in the second semester. That was when you took a trip and you had a picnic. And so I waited and went the second semester and graduated with the class. But the first semester, I cooked for the harvest hands who were busy baling hay and all, and I always made the lunch for them. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes and gravies and hot biscuits, dessert.
Did you have jobs in Prairie Grove or work that you did around the town whenever y'all were married?
No, but in school, you had a business class that you were to have an experience in some business, and Father talked to Jim Parks about my working at the telephone company, and that's what I did for my school project. And that was in the old building, and it was upstairs. Had so much fun with those people that I worked with. And trying to think of some.
Where was it located?
Pardon?
Where was the upstairs? Where was the building? Where was it located?
Okay, across the street from where the bank is now, the Arvest, it was west, and it was upstairs. That upstairs part, they removed that. And someone worked at night, and she slept there. And Irene Watson was her name. And she would sleep there in case somebody had an emergency call. Then she was there for that.
Tell me how the phones worked when you worked at the phone company and what your job was.
Well, you see these pictures where but where you punch in the slot to answer people, that's what the board was like up there. And the phones, yes, you would ring either one long or three shorts. And our combination at home was one long and four shorts. That's when it would ring. That was yours because they were party lines. And so you would answer if it was the right ring for you.
What about placing long distance calls? How do those work?
Didn't do enough of those to really, I really don't know. I don't remember about the long distance. There was a house in Farmington that the Prairie Grove had a system over there, and there was a lady that operated that. That was a big two-story house over there. And then the office at Prairie Grove.
And what kind of business was your husband in?
Well, he farmed, and then he and Jimmy Smith did a tractor business, the Alice Chalmers tractor business in Prairie Grove.
Tell me more about that.
Well, I have our Alice Chalmers, our WD-45. That was supposed to be about the best tractor made at the time, and they had customers from all around. And it was an interesting business. And Jimmy also worked on cars in there. It was a combination tractor and car repair and all.
And what years did he have that about? What years?
1957, I think that was when they went into business. Robert Earl didn't stay in that too long because there was so much to do on the farm that it was just a little more than what he could handle all the time, to have the time to be away from the farm, because there's just so much. When you have grapes, you have to prune and tie and spray, and so there was more to do on the farm. So,
how did you get involved in the insurance business? Tell me about that.
My father, Maynard Dorman, they wanted him to come in when they organized in 1922, but he was already associated with a company out of Little Rock, so he had to make arrangements to get out of that and to go to work for the Washington County Farmers Mutual Fire. And that was 1924 when he went to work there. And from an early age, and then he became secretary manager. And of course, they didn't have offices. They did it in their homes. And Mother and I would always help to stuff the envelopes with the assessment that was sent out and put stamps on them. So I started working really at a very early age, probably about 12 or 13 on that. Then when he was ready to retire from that, I was elected to serve as the manager of the Fire and Wind Company. Then I retired at the end of '99, and my son, Robert Anthony Tony Cunningham, became secretary manager, and he retired about 6 years ago, and we didn't have anybody else that was interested in doing it.
Tell me about your going further back in your family. I know you had family members involved in running a monument company. Can you talk to me about that? Or the quarry?
As Robert Earl he joined the infantry, and he was sent overseas in September 1944, and he sailed the day that our son, Robert Anthony, was born, September 24, 1944. Got over there, and in December, it was the Battle of the Bulge, and he was captured and was a POW then until his release, and Patton was the one that came through and released him. But he said, the U.S. would go over and bomb out the railroads, and the POWs then would have to get out and repair those railroads for the Germans. So, and they didn't have much food, didn't amount to much. When he was released, he weighed 87 pounds, and he was 6'2". And that experience really was an effect on his health, and he always had some problems with that. But he made it home, and the day that we received the telegram, the postmasters back then delivered them, and Father and I had been to sing at a funeral at the Methodist church in Farmington, Arkansas, and got home, and then Mr. Broyles came with the telegram saying that he was missing in action. And I said, he will be home. He will be home. He's going to be all right. He's going to be home. And he was. He came in. I had gone to California with Robert Earl's mother. His mother and father, Ludi and Earl Cunningham, lived in Fullerton, California. And I had taken Tony and gone to visit them. And while we were out there, that's when Robert Earl came through Fayetteville. Dad knew he was coming. He was on the train. Dad went down on Dixon Street and got to see him and talk to him a minute or two. And then Robert Earl came on to California, and then we drove back to Arkansas. Then he was stationed at Hot Springs at the Army Navy General, and he was a clerk. So he was going to be there until he would get out of the service. So Tony and I moved down. We had a little car, and Dad helped me pack it, and I took off with Tony to Hot Springs, Arkansas. About halfway, or maybe about that distance, my radiator kept getting hot. I'm like, goodness gracious, what on earth is wrong? Well, Dad didn't think about it. He had tied the spare tire on the front of the car. And the service station I pulled into, I said to the fellow, do you think that tire at the front is causing my radiator to heat? And he said, well, it's quite possible that it is. I said, well, let's move it. I didn't know where I was going to put it because I was loaded. But anyway, we got it off, put it somewhere. I made it to Hot Springs.
Let's go back to your grandfather. Didn't he have a business, a quarry type business? Tell me about that.
Father's father, Ernest Dorman, did a monument business. And in the cemetery here in Prairie Grove, the old monuments, most of those he did. And of course, he put them in other cemeteries. People bought them from him for other cemeteries. But he was not good at collecting. So at that time, Dad had gone to Colorado, and that's where he had met Mother. And they were married and lived out there. Dad was managing a lumber yard. Well, Grandfather was going to lose his business. So Mother and Dad, with Eugenia, she was born in Colorado, they came back to Prairie Grove so Dad could save the business, which he did. But a lot of times people paid for their monuments with chickens and eggs and whatever they might have. But Grandfather wasn't even good at collecting that. So that's why Dad had to come back. And his business was in Prairie Grove. And it was about not even a half a block from where the bank is to the west. That's where his business was, where his shop was.
When you were a young child, what would you and your friends, or maybe your sisters, what would y'all do for fun?
Well, it was most generally on Sunday afternoon. And those of us that had bicycles, we rode our bicycles. The people had horses, they rode their horses. And we just did the area out there, and we'd meet over at the church.
What about adults? What would adults do for fun when you were a kid? What do you remember your parents and your parents' friends doing?
Most generally on Sunday afternoons, my parents gathered up clothes. Mother was good at canning everything because Dad always had such a wonderful garden. And they would take food and go to the people that they felt like needed help. And that's what they did on Sunday afternoons.
What did you and your husband do when you were a young couple? What would y'all do for fun and social activity?
In the spring and summer, we went to the river a lot, took a picnic lunch, and would fish after church on Sunday afternoons. That was one thing we did. Of course, when the children got into school, they had their friends, and we were very involved with all their activities. We were always the sponsors of anything that either one of them was doing. And so we were very involved with their things.
On the Illinois River?
Pardon?
The Illinois River?
The Illinois River, yes. That's where we would.
Tell me about your kids and what they did when they were growing up for fun.
Well, by the time they were ready for school, there had been consolidation had happened, so they would be going to Farmington School, and that's where they went. And we were we were sponsors on any activities that they had, and they both played basketball. Tony played football. Charlotte was a cheerleader. And when Charlotte graduated from the university, she came back and taught at Farmington for 2 years. And then she and Jim moved into Prairie Grove, and she taught in Prairie Grove for 2 years till he had finished and gotten his master's degree. And Tony went to the service. He and Glenna were married, and then he went to he was in the Marine Corps. And then he was sent to Vietnam for 13 months. And when he came home, he lacked 1 year of finishing the university. And he came home and finished that. And that's when he went to work for Sears. And he worked there 25 years and retired from that. Charlotte never did teach in St. Louis. That's where she and Jim moved. And she never did teach after she taught at Prairie Grove.
Tell me what you remember, your earliest memories of the Battlefield Park. And did you ever go there very often?
Well, in grape season, we used to bring baskets of grapes and sell them to the visitors. And then you had to be a part of the association, so we couldn't do that anymore if we weren't going to be a part of the association and pay dues to do that. But we did that for 2 or 3 years. And there was a man, Mr. Hammondtree was a neighbor, and he always had a hamburger stand at the Battlefield Park. Made the best hamburgers, the best. And but it was always fun to come and visit and see the people and see the activities and hear them.
When you were living in Prairie Grove area, do you remember coming to town for Trades Day?
Didn't do that very much because as Father was secretary of the companies, he would go to Fayetteville on Saturdays to meet the policyholders. They had an office that they used on Saturdays. So basically, we went to Fayetteville nearly every Saturday. Came over to Prairie Grove some, but not that much on Saturdays.
What are some memories you have of Prairie Grove community and the people you know here? What are some things you can share?
Well, of course, I knew so many of them through the church, you know, the owners of the Crescent the drugstore, and had association with them through the church, and we had different meetings of the organizations in the church, and so many of those people were involved. And so that's how I really knew, and then the time that I spent with most of them.
Tell me your earliest memories of the church and kind of what you remember over the years of the Prairie Grove Methodist Church.
The Sunday school room was downstairs for the young ones, and I remember being in there and I'd love to go. I just had a good time. Our teachers made it very interesting for us, and I always enjoyed going back every Sunday to see their teachers and be involved in whatever the activities were. Then we used to have some really neat things, programs like on the fifth Sunday. We even did our own band, you know. Sarah Carl, she was the drummer. What was it? She hit some pan for her drum. But we had programs that were most interesting, to involve people in the church, to have activities.
Let's talk about what it was like living in the days before you had indoor plumbing.
Well, it could be very cold. You didn't spend much time in there if it was really cold. But grateful and thankful to have what we had. But Father did a shower for us in the summertime, an outdoor shower. We had a water tank which would hold, I guess, about 500 gallons of water. Had to have that to put in the sprayer to spray the apples and the oranges, apples and the grapes and the different things. So he would run a hose from that tank over, he did this close to where the outhouse was, and he put up tarps around. So the first one that got in the summertime to have their shower, because the hose was out in the hot sun, you had to be very careful. You could get burned. And then the next one, if the second one went pretty soon, maybe their water was going to be cold. They had to wait a little bit till the sun would warm up the hose again. But that was really a very neat thing to have, a shower in the hot summertime outside. Another thing we did, we slept outside a lot. Dad put a shed, attached it to the garage on the west side, and it was wide enough to accommodate 2 full-size beds, and that's where we slept. And if it rained, he had tarps that he could drop on either side so we wouldn't have to go into the house and we wouldn't get wet. But it made it as convenient as he could in the hot weather. So those were 2 things that he done. And my present garage, the garage that was attached to the house was long as the house. He cut that in 2 and put it together, and that's what the present garage is.
What about electricity?
Well, we got that in 1939, and that was a blessing. You could see much better, and it would keep adding things. You had to be careful that you didn't overload your circuits, but that was a blessing. It really was.
What year did you get a phone?
1939 was when we got it.
Anything else you can think of that I hadn't thought to ask about?
The telephone, I don't know the exact year that was, but we had that a long time. And we used butane, got butane for gas before we had natural gas.